8-year-old girl lost her voice after watching her parents die, until a lonely miner made her speak. The desert planet Red Haven looked calm from far away. But up close, it was a hard place to live. The sky stayed copper most days, and the wind carried red dust that found its way into everything: boots, food crates, even the cracks in doors. At night, 2 pale moons rose over the mining camp like quiet watchers. Most people came to Red Haven for one reason: work. The ground held rare crystal ore that powered ships and machines across the outer colonies. Mining paid well, but it also took something from everyone. Jonah Hale had learned that early. He worked at Shaft 7, a deep cut into the planet where machines groaned and lights blinked like tired eyes. Jonah didn't talk much. He did his job, collected his pay, and stayed out of people's lives. Workers called him Lonely Jonah or Silent Miner, depending on their mood. He never corrected them. He didn't care what name they used as long as they left him alone. He liked the underground. Down there it was dark and steady. No big crowds, no loud laughter, no questions, just metal, stone, and the sound of drills. Up on the surface, memories waited. So Jonah kept his days simple: wake up, eat, work, repair machines, sleep. That was enough, or at least he thought it was. One afternoon, the camp's quiet routine broke. A long siren wailed through the colony. The sound spread across the metal buildings and shipping containers, making people step outside and look toward the landing pad. Jonah was near the equipment shed, checking power cells. He didn't rush to join the crowd, but he did pause to listen. A dispatcher's voice crackled over the loudspeakers. "Emergency incoming, medical shuttle landing, all non-med staff clear the pad." The camp moved like ants disturbed from a nest. Workers gathered at a distance, whispering. Jonah stayed near the shadows where no one expected him to speak. A small shuttle came down fast, its engines blowing dust into the air. It landed with a rough bounce, as if the pilot had been fighting the wind the entire way. The side hatch opened. 2 medics jumped out first. Then more hands reached inside. A stretcher slid out, then another. Jonah didn't step closer, but he saw enough. 2 adults, both covered in dust and torn fabric. Their faces were pale and still. Medics moved quickly, calling out instructions, trying hard not to waste a second. And then behind all of that, a child stepped down. She was small, about 8 years old. She wore a thin jacket that looked too big for her. Her hair was tangled with dust, and her hands clutched a soft blanket so tight her knuckles looked white. She stood still as a statue. People spoke around her. A woman from supplies hurried over with water. A man tried asking her questions. A medic crouched to meet her eyes. The girl did not answer, not a sound. Jonah watched from where he stood. Something in the way she stared forward, eyes wide, jaw tight, made his stomach turn. He knew that look. It wasn't stubbornness. It was a person trying to keep themselves from falling apart. Jonah looked away. He told himself it wasn't his problem. The camp had social workers. Medics, managers, people who knew what to do. He wasn't one of those people. He was just a miner. So he turned back to his equipment and kept working. The next morning, the camp buzzed with talk. At the breakfast counter, workers spoke in low voices as they filled trays. It was a family convoy, one man said. They were bringing supplies from Ridge Station. "Storm hit them," another replied. "Then scavengers showed up, took what they could and ran." Jonah kept his head down, eating in silence. "They got the adults out," the first man continued. "But they didn't make it." A quiet moment passed after those words. Someone else said, "The little girl saw everything." Jonah's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "She hasn't spoken since," the man added. "Doc says she's not hurt, but it's like her voice just disappeared." Jonah swallowed hard, then forced himself to keep eating. He told himself not to care. But the words stayed in his head all day. The little girl saw everything. She hasn't spoken. That evening, Jonah stayed late at Shaft 7. He told himself it was because one of the drill rigs needed a new stabilizer. That was true. But he also knew he didn't want to return to camp early and hear more people talking. When he finally walked back under the copper sky, the wind had calmed. Lights from the colony shimmered across the dust like a scattered chain of stars. Jonah passed storage crates, fuel tanks, and the long row of worker cabins. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Light, careful steps. He stopped. The footsteps stopped too. Jonah turned. The girl stood a few meters away, near the edge of a light pole's glow. Her blanket hung over one arm. Her face was still, but her eyes were fixed on him. Jonah felt his throat tighten. He didn't know what to do with a child looking at him like that. Children needed warmth, comfort, words. Jonah wasn't good at any of those things. You shouldn't be out here, he said quietly. No reply. He pointed toward the central building. Medical wing is there. The girl did not move. Jonah sighed. Are you lost? Her fingers tightened on the blanket. Slowly she shook her head, so she wasn't lost. She was following him on purpose. Jonah looked around. The camp was not empty, but at this hour most people were inside eating or resting. A few workers passed in the distance, too far away to notice. Jonah tried again, gentler this time. What's your name? Silence. The girl blinked once like the question was heavy. Jonah rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, you don't have to talk. But you can't just follow strangers. The girl's eyes dropped briefly to the ground, then rose again. She stayed. Jonah turned and walked toward his cabin, hoping she would go another direction. After several steps, he heard the soft crunch of dust again. She was still behind him. Jonah stopped with a quiet curse under his breath, not angry, just tired. He turned. Kid, listen. People will worry. They'll be looking for you. She hugged the blanket closer and stood very still, like she was afraid he would yell. Jonah didn't yell. He couldn't, because in her silence he saw something that reminded him of himself, years ago when he had learned that words could feel useless. Jonah looked at the ground for a moment, thinking. Then he exhaled. Fine, he said. Just walk with me until the main path. Then you go back. The girl nodded slightly, as if agreeing to a deal. They walked side by side, keeping a small space between them. The moons rose higher, pale and quiet. The air smelled like dust and metal. Jonah tried not to look at her too much. But he noticed everything anyway, the way she flinched when a door slammed somewhere, the way her shoulders stiffened when a loud voice carried through the camp. She wasn't just silent. She was careful, like the world had become unsafe overnight. When they reached the fork in the path, one direction to the medical building, the other to Jonah's cabin, Jonah stopped. That way, he said, pointing. The girl did not move. Jonah stared at her. You're supposed to go. She looked at the medical building, then back at him. And very slowly she shook her head again. Jonah felt a strange pressure behind his eyes. He didn't like this feeling. He didn't like being needed. Being needed meant responsibility, and responsibility meant fear of failing. But he couldn't ignore the truth standing right in front of him. She had no one, not tonight. Maybe people were taking care of her during the day, but at night fear got louder, silence got heavier. Jonah unlocked his cabin door and opened it. Warm air and dim light spilled out. He looked down at the girl. Just for tonight, he said. You can sit inside, then in the morning I'll take you back. Her eyes widened a little, like she hadn't expected kindness to be offered without a price. Jonah added quickly, almost like he was defending himself, You can leave any time. The girl stepped forward slowly, careful as if crossing thin ice. Inside, Jonah's cabin was simple. One bed, one chair, a small table with a cracked screen, tools lined neatly along one wall. Jonah pulled a second blanket from a storage bin and placed it on the chair. Sit, the girl sat. He heated water in a small unit and poured it into a cup with a packet of mild nutrient tea. He set it on the table in front of her. She stared at it. It's warm, Jonah said. Not bad. She lifted the cup with both hands as if it might disappear. She took a tiny sip. Jonah sat on the edge of his bed, keeping distance so she didn't feel trapped. The room stayed quiet except for the soft hum of the cabin's power line. Minutes passed. The girl stared at the window where the moons shone through dust. Jonah finally spoke, low and careful. You don't have to talk, he said. Not if you're not ready. The girl's fingers loosened slightly around her blanket. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jonah leaned back against the wall and let himself breathe. For the first time in a long time, the cabin didn't feel empty. Outside, the wind whispered against the metal walls. Inside, two silent people sat under the same roof, both carrying pain, both not knowing how to name it yet. And somewhere deep inside Jonah, a thought formed, quiet but clear. Maybe this is why she followed me. Maybe she saw a lonely person and hoped he wouldn't send her away. Morning came slowly to Red Haven. The wind had calmed during the night, leaving the desert quiet and still. Pale sunlight slipped through the small window of Jonah Hale's cabin, touching the metal floor with a soft glow. Jonah woke early, as he always did. For a moment he forgot the girl was there. Then he saw her. She sat on the chair near the window, wrapped in the extra blanket he had given her. She looked smaller in the morning light, almost fragile. Her eyes were open, watching the dust outside. Did you sleep? Jonah asked gently. She didn't answer, but she nodded once. That was enough. Jonah stood and stretched slowly. He moved carefully so he wouldn't startle her. He heated water and prepared two simple nutrient meals. When he placed one on the table, she hesitated before taking it. "Eat," he said softly. "You need strength." She obeyed quietly. Jonah noticed something important. She watched his hands closely. Every movement he made, she followed with her eyes as if learning whether he was safe. He kept his voice calm and slow, no sudden gestures. After breakfast, Jonah picked up his jacket. "We should go back to the medical wing," he said. "People will worry." The girl froze, her shoulders tightened. Jonah paused. He realized she wasn't afraid of the building, she was afraid of being alone again. "I'll stay with you," he added quickly. "Just to check in, okay?" She looked at him carefully. After a long moment, she nodded. The walk through the colony felt different this morning. Workers were already heading toward their stations. Machines hummed. Cargo drones floated overhead like silent birds. Some people glanced at Jonah and the girl with curiosity. Jonah ignored them. Inside the medical wing, warm lights and clean air replaced the dusty wind outside. A nurse looked up from her station and immediately stood. "There you are," she said with relief. "We've been searching for her." Jonah felt slightly uncomfortable under the nurse's gaze. "She followed me," he explained. "I didn't want to leave her alone," the nurse softened. "Thank you, she slipped away during the night. We were worried." Another medic approached slowly, kneeling near the girl. "Good morning," he said gently. "Do you remember me?" The girl stared but did not speak. The medic sighed quietly but smiled anyway. "That's all right." He looked at Jonah. "She still hasn't talked. We believe it's trauma." "Her voice is there, she just isn't using it." Jonah nodded. He didn't know what to say. "We're trying different approaches," the medic continued. "Familiar routines, quiet environments, sometimes it takes time." Time, Jonah understood that word well. The medic placed a small tablet in front of the girl. It showed colorful drawings and simple games. She touched the screen slowly, curiosity breaking through her stillness for a moment. Jonah felt relief. Maybe she would be okay here. "Well," he said awkwardly, stepping back. "I should go." The girl's head snapped toward him. Her hand tightened around his sleeve before he could move. Jonah froze. The medic raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Jonah looked down at her small hand gripping his jacket. Her eyes held something new, not fear, but pleading. He swallowed. "I have to work," he said gently. Her grip loosened slightly but didn't disappear. The medic spoke softly. "She trusts you, that's rare right now." Jonah felt a strange weight settle in his chest. He wasn't used to being trusted. "Can she visit later?" Jonah asked quietly. The medic smiled. "If you're okay with it, that might help." Jonah nodded slowly. "After my shift." The girl released his sleeve but kept watching him as he walked toward the door. He didn't realize until he stepped outside that he was already looking forward to seeing her again. Work felt different that day. Jonah moved through the mining shaft with his usual precision, but his thoughts drifted back to the quiet girl sitting in his cabin, holding a warm cup with both hands. He wondered what her name was. He wondered if she would ever speak again. During lunch break, another miner named Elias sat beside him. "Heard you brought the kid home last night," Elias said with a grin. Jonah frowned. "People talk too much." Elias laughed. "Relax, it's not a bad thing. Camp needs more kindness." Jonah didn't reply. But the words stayed with him. When his shift ended, Jonah cleaned his tools faster than usual. The sky was turning gold as he walked toward the medical wing. The girl sat near the entrance as if she had been waiting for him. When she saw him, she stood immediately. Jonah felt something warm spread through his chest. "Hey," he said quietly. She stepped closer. A nurse handed him a small bag. "Some supplies," she explained. "Drawing tools. She seems calmer when she's near you." Jonah nodded awkwardly. "Thanks." They walked back toward his cabin together. This time the silence between them felt less heavy. Inside, Jonah placed the drawing tools on the table. The girl's eyes lit up slightly. She sat and began sketching carefully, slow lines forming shapes Jonah couldn't understand yet. He stayed nearby, fixing a small device, pretending not to watch. Minutes passed. Then she turned the paper toward him. It showed two small figures standing under twin moons, one tall, one small. Jonah felt his throat tighten. "That's us," he asked gently. She nodded. It was the first time she had shown him something without hesitation. Jonah smiled faintly. "You're good at drawing." She looked down, but her shoulders relaxed a little. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the walls. A sudden loud bang echoed from somewhere in the camp, maybe a cargo crate dropping. The girl flinched hard, dropping the pencil. Jonah stood immediately but moved slowly toward her. "It's okay," he said softly. "Just noise." She trembled slightly. Jonah hesitated, then placed a small mining helmet on the table. "See this," he said. "It protects against loud sounds underground. Nothing gets through." She looked at it curiously. He gently placed it near her hands, not forcing. After a moment, she touched it, then held it close like a shield. Jonah realized something important. She didn't need someone to fix her. She needed someone to stay. Later that evening, as the moons rose again, they sat near the window. Jonah spoke quietly, telling simple stories about mining, about strange rocks he had found, about machines that broke at the worst times. He didn't expect answers. But as he talked, he noticed her breathing slowing, her posture relaxing. For the first time since he met her, she looked peaceful. He leaned back and watched the stars. "Tomorrow," he said gently, "maybe you can show me more drawings." She looked at him, her lips parted slightly. A faint sound escaped, barely more than air. But it was the closest she had come to speaking. Jonah didn't react strongly. He just nodded, calm and patient. "That's enough for today," he said softly, and inside he felt something change. Maybe healing didn't happen in big moments. Maybe it began with small sounds, shared silence, and the decision to stay beside someone when they needed it most. The next few days on Red Haven passed slowly, but something inside Jonah Hale's small cabin began to change. The silence was no longer heavy. It felt softer now. The girl spent more time there after visiting the medical wing each morning. The staff allowed it because she stayed calmer near Jonah. They still hoped she would speak, but they stopped forcing her. Instead, they encouraged small steps, and small steps were happening. She drew often, paper after paper filled with sketches, moons, mining towers, desert wind, and sometimes people. Jonah noticed that she always drew him wearing his miner helmet, standing close to her. The pictures were simple, but they showed something important: trust. Jonah never asked too many questions. He had learned that pushing too hard could break fragile things. Instead, he talked about ordinary things: how machines worked, how he fixed broken parts, how he counted steps when walking underground so he wouldn't get lost. Sometimes she listened quietly. Sometimes she only watched the dust move outside the window. But she stayed. One afternoon, the colony received news of rising trouble beyond the mining perimeter. Scavenger groups had been seen near the outer ridges again. Security teams increased patrols. Workers were told to stay close to main paths and avoid traveling alone after dark. Jonah listened to the announcement while tightening bolts on a drilling unit. Danger was nothing new on Red Haven. But now, the idea of danger felt different. Now he thought about someone else. That evening he returned to the cabin faster than usual. The girl waited inside, sitting on the floor with her drawing papers spread around her. She looked up immediately when he entered. "Hey," Jonah said softly. She raised one drawing. This one showed three figures: the tall miner, the small girl, and another shape far away. The distant figure looked dark and unclear. Jonah studied it carefully. "Someone else?" he asked. She didn't respond, but her eyes shifted toward the door, then back to the paper. Jonah felt a quiet unease. Maybe she remembered the attack. Maybe the drawing was just a memory trying to escape. He nodded slowly. "It's okay," he said. "You don't have to explain." She seemed relieved by that. Later that night, loud voices echoed outside. Jonah opened the cabin door slightly and saw security workers moving quickly through the camp. A cargo drone had malfunctioned near the landing zone, causing alarms and flashing lights. The sudden noise made the girl freeze. Her breathing became fast. Her hands shook. Jonah immediately lowered the lights inside the cabin and closed the door. "It's all right," he said calmly. "Just machines being loud." She covered her ears. Jonah remembered the mining helmet again. He gently handed it to her. She held it close, breathing slowly until the noise faded. After several minutes, her shoulders relaxed. Jonah sat nearby, keeping a respectful distance. "You're strong," he said quietly. She looked at him, surprised. He shrugged slightly. "Strong doesn't mean you never get scared. It just means you keep going." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to understand. The next morning, Jonah asked something new. "Do you want to see the surface ridge?" he said gently. "It's safe during daylight." She hesitated. Jonah didn't push. He simply opened the door and stepped outside. After a moment, she followed. They walked slowly beyond the main buildings toward a small rocky hill that overlooked the desert. The wind moved gently across the sand, carrying soft whispers instead of storms. From the ridge, the mining towers looked small against the endless horizon. Jonah sat on a flat rock. The girl stood beside him, holding her blanket. For a while, neither spoke. Jonah pointed toward the sky. "Ships pass through that path sometimes," he said. "Hard to see unless you know where to look." She followed his finger. A faint line of light moved slowly far above. Her eyes widened slightly. Jonah smiled faintly. "Space is big," he said. "But sometimes small places matter more." The girl sat down beside him. It was the first time she chose to sit close without hesitation. They watched the sky together. After a long silence, Jonah began telling a story not about mining but about himself. "I wasn't always here," he said quietly. "I used to work on another colony, had friends, a family too." He paused, unsure why he was speaking so openly, maybe because she listened without judgment. "Things changed," he continued, "and I stopped talking much." He didn't give details, he didn't need to. The girl looked at him carefully. Her hand moved slightly toward his arm, then stopped halfway, unsure. Jonah noticed but didn't react strongly. He simply stayed still, giving her time. Finally, her fingers touched his sleeve gently. It felt like a silent thank you. When they returned to camp, the medical chief approached them. "We're happy she's improving," the woman said kindly. "She smiles more now, that's a good sign." Jonah nodded. "We still don't know her name," the chief added softly. "No record survived from the convoy attack." Jonah looked down at the girl. "What should we call you?" he asked gently. The girl looked thoughtful. Her lips parted again, but no sound came. Instead, she picked up a small stick from the ground and wrote slowly in the dust. "One letter at a time. Lia." Jonah read it quietly. "Leah," she nodded. A small smile touched her face. It was the first real smile he had seen from her. The medical chief's eyes softened. "Hello, Leah," she said warmly. Jonah felt something shift deep inside him. She had a name now. She wasn't just the silent girl. She was Leah. That evening, as they sat in the cabin, Leah drew another picture. This one showed the miner and the girl standing near a home. Above them were bright stars. She handed it to Jonah carefully. "You want to stay here?" he asked softly. She nodded. Jonah stared at the drawing for a long time. He had lived alone for years because loneliness felt safer than loss. But now the cabin felt different, warmer, alive. Outside, the wind moved gently through the colony. Lights flickered on one by one as night arrived. Jonah placed the drawing carefully on the wall. "You're safe here," he said quietly. Leah looked at him. Her lips moved again. A small sound escaped, clearer this time, though still soft. Jonah didn't rush her. He simply waited. Maybe tomorrow she would speak. Maybe not. Healing didn't follow schedules, but something important had already happened. She trusted him enough to try. And for the first time in many years, Jonah realized he wasn't just surviving on Red Haven anymore. He was beginning to live again. The wind over Red Haven carried a different feeling that morning. Jonah Hale noticed it the moment he stepped outside his cabin. The sky was clear, but the air felt tense, like the planet itself was waiting for something. Inside the cabin, Leah sat at the table, carefully coloring a drawing. Sunlight fell across her hair, turning the dust into tiny sparks of gold. She looked calmer now compared to the silent girl who had first followed him days ago. Jonah watched her quietly for a moment. "Morning," he said gently. She looked up and gave a small nod. Even that small reaction felt like progress. He handed her a warm drink and she accepted it with both hands. The way she stayed close to him now felt natural, not forced. She moved around the cabin as if it had become a safe place, maybe even a home. Jonah didn't say that word out loud. He wasn't ready yet. Later that day, an urgent announcement echoed across the colony. "Security alert, possible scavenger movement near Outer Ridge. All workers remain within marked zones." Jonah's jaw tightened. He remembered the stories about the convoy attack, the same attack that had taken Leah's parents. He glanced toward her. She had stopped drawing. Her eyes moved toward the door, fear rising again. "It's okay," Jonah said calmly. "They're just being careful." He spoke with confidence even though uncertainty pressed against his chest. He picked up his mining jacket. "I need to check something at the shaft," he said softly. "But you stay here, I'll be back soon." Leah stood quickly, shaking her head. She didn't want him to leave. Jonah knelt slightly so they were at the same level. "I'll come back," he promised. "You're safe." She hesitated, then slowly nodded. Before leaving, he placed the small mining helmet beside her, her quiet shield against loud sounds. Outside, security teams moved quickly through the camp. Jonah walked toward Shaft 7, meeting Elias near the entrance. "Patrol spotted tracks near the ridge," Elias said quietly. "Might be nothing, might be scavengers again." Jonah frowned. "They coming close? Not sure yet." Jonah worked faster than usual, checking systems and preparing equipment in case evacuation became necessary. His thoughts stayed fixed on the cabin, on Leah. He finished early and headed back. As he approached the living area, he noticed something strange. The door to his cabin was slightly open. Jonah's heart jumped. He moved carefully, stepping inside. Leah sat exactly where he had left her, holding the helmet. Her eyes turned toward him instantly, relief flooding her face. Jonah exhaled slowly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded quickly. Outside, another announcement came, security confirming that the tracks belonged to wandering machines, not raiders. The danger passed, but Jonah felt something inside him change again. The idea of losing her, even for a moment, scared him more than he expected. That evening, the colony gathered near the central hall for a small community meal. It wasn't a celebration, just a way to ease tension after the alert. Jonah rarely attended these gatherings, but Leah looked curious. "Want to go?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. The hall was warm and full of voices. Workers laughed softly, sharing food after long shifts. When Jonah and Leah entered, several people smiled at them. The nurse from the medical wing waved. "Look who joined us," she said kindly. Leah stayed close to Jonah's side, but she didn't hide. She watched everything carefully, the lights, the conversations, the safe normalcy of people eating together. A child about her age ran past, laughing loudly. Leah flinched at first but didn't retreat. Jonah noticed and gave a small, approving nod. "You're doing good," he whispered. They sat at a table near the wall. Someone handed Leah a small, sweet dessert. She stared at it as if unsure what to do. Jonah shrugged. "I think you're supposed to eat it." She tried a small bite. A faint smile appeared. It was the brightest expression Jonah had seen from her yet. After dinner, people began sharing stories. Simple things about mining accidents turned funny, or strange weather events. The room filled with warmth and laughter. Jonah listened quietly. Leah sat beside him, relaxed but still silent. Then a loud metal tray fell accidentally across the room. The sharp noise echoed. Leah's body stiffened. Her breathing quickened. Jonah placed his hand gently on the table, steady and calm. "It's all right," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes wide. He didn't rush her, he simply waited. Her lips parted. A faint sound came out, barely louder than a whisper. Jonah stayed still. Again she tried. This time the sound formed into a word. "Joe." It was soft and fragile, but it was real. Jonah felt his chest tighten. "Take your time," he said gently. She swallowed, gathering courage. "Jonah." The word came out small but clear. The noise of the room faded in his ears. For a moment he couldn't move. She had spoken. Her voice sounded gentle, like something new being born. He smiled slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. "Hi, Leah," he said quietly. She watched him, searching his reaction. When she saw calm pride instead of shock, she relaxed slightly. The nurse across the room noticed and covered her mouth in surprise, tears shining in her eyes. But Jonah kept everything peaceful. No cheering, no pressure, just acceptance. Because this moment belonged to Leah. Later that night, they walked back to the cabin under twin moons. The wind felt softer now. Leah walked beside him, closer than ever. After a while, she spoke again, only one word. "Stay." Jonah stopped walking. She looked up at him, nervous but determined. "Stay," she repeated quietly, pointing toward the cabin, then toward herself. He understood. She didn't want this to be temporary. She didn't want to lose another home. Jonah took a slow breath. For years, he had lived alone because it felt safer. No attachments meant no heartbreak. But somewhere along the way, this silent girl had changed everything. He knelt in front of her. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. Her shoulders relaxed, and she smiled, a real, open smile this time. They entered the cabin together. Jonah placed her newest drawing on the wall beside the others. The pictures showed their journey, from two lonely figures under distant moons to two people standing side by side near a small home. Outside, Red Haven continued as it always had, harsh, dusty, and unpredictable. But inside the cabin, something stronger than loneliness had grown. Not just survival, not just healing, family. And as the moons rose high above the desert sky, Jonah realized that sometimes the quietest voices carried the deepest strength. And sometimes, all it took to make someone speak again was simply staying when everyone else had left.